The doors open before dawn when the city is still hushed and the thin light has not yet touched the river. Babylon breathes in the dark like a giant animal granaries sleeping under their domed roofs, alleyways holding their secrets, courtyards draped in shadow. You rise because you have been summoned, because your name was spoken in a voice you could not refuse. You are grown, a man by law and count of years, but untouched by any lover. The word the priests like to use for you is pure. In your mother's house, the cup of watered beer sits undrunk beside the hearth. A parchment strip, stamped with an official seal bearing the star of the goddess, names you, directs you, binds you. When you lift it, it seems to weigh more than papyrus ought to weigh, as if a fate has been folded into the fibers. Outside, the lane is already swept. Someone, perhaps a neighbor who heard the news, has sprinkled the dust with water, so it won't rise in a cloud when the priestly escort arrives. You can hear them long before you see them. The measured call of sandals, the clink of amulets, the soft cough of a man who keeps incense in his sleeves. They greet you in formal tones and do not look at your mother's face for long. They do not need to. Every family in this quarter knows the exchange. A body for the favor of the gods, a life redirected for the peace of the city. Refusal is not spoken of. Refusal does not belong to the language of those who interpret omens and account for grain and guard the archives. You step into the street between them, your cloak fastened, your hair bound with a plain cord that will be cut away, they say, before the sun is high. No one shouts, no one throws stones. Babylon accepts the will of its priests because the priests speak in the grammar of storms and eclipses and taxes and kings. The priests have persuaded everyone, including you if you are honest, that there is no difference between the wish of heaven and the order signed with a seal. The temple district rises from the city's core like a second city. Its walls hold the echo of drums. Its courtyards hold the memory of thousands of feet, pilgrims and penitents and petitioners. The stair that leads up to the first gate is worn smooth by centuries of climbing. A priest of moderate rank reads your name from a clay tile and nods to a man with a bronze stylus who scratches a mark on a tablet. You become, with that tiny scratch, part of a ledger that will travel farther than you ever will, copied and recopied, filed in a room that smells like dust and lamp oil. Your escort brings you through a narrow side door where the light is dim and the air cooler. Here, water runs perpetually from a spout decorated with a lion's head into a stone basin. You are told to wash. They speak of cleansing. The water is cold enough to make you gasp, and when you look up, you catch your reflection rippling in the basin, already altered by the wavering surface, already not quite yours. They cut your hair. They cut it with an efficiency that feels like a military act. Locks fall to the floor, swept at once into a pail and carried away for some ritual you are not told about. They trim your nails and examine your hands, turning them palm up, palm down, as if the lines there could betray some disqualifying secret. They take your clothes and hand you a linen garment that is both simple and strange, because it fits no fashion of the market. You are marked now by cloth and cut and stance. Someone murmurs a phrase that could be a blessing or an inventory note. When you ask where you will sleep, the answer is, near the fountain, and, for one night, and we will see how the omens speak. The language of the priests is full of that plural we, and full of subjects that are never named. You learn quickly that this is part of the method. The less the speakers are named, the more they are everywhere. In the first chamber, the incense is a throat scratch and a sweetness both. Your eyes, water, and the world becomes a little hazy, which suits the purpose of those who invite you to kneel. The priest who speaks to you is older and has a patient air, as if he has waited many seasons for this conversation with you in particular. He tells you that your virginity is an offering. He tells you that untouched bodies carry currents that can be braided into the city's luck. He tells you that purity is not a possession but a tool, and that tools must be shaped according to the will of the god. He does not threaten. He does not need to. He simply sets before you a world in which every road that isn't the temple's road goes nowhere worth going. They give you a new name for use within the precincts. It is a name that tastes like iron the first time you try it. Your birth name is recorded in the ledger, but they will speak to you with this new one until the old one feels like a rumor. The first night passes in a small cell with a reed mat and a jug of water and a flat cake of barley set on a wooden plate you return without biting. The second night passes in the same cell with a different song drifting through the wall, a high, thin melody sung in a mode you have not heard in taverns or weddings. By the third night, you are an expert at watching the light move across a wall no longer than your outstretched arms. Your stomach talks steadily. Your mouth dries between sips. In the courtyard, they pass with bowls of embers, adding resin to make the smoke thicker or thinner as the ritual requires. It is in this waiting that you come to understand how power works here, not as sudden blows, but as pressure applied everywhere at once. When they judge you ready for the first long passage, they lead you through a corridor painted with animals in pairs. The beasts are lively, frozen in attitudes of movement that make you dizzy if you stare too long. The corridor climbs, turns, climbs again. The priest beside you points out nothing. He has done this too often to see any of it. The chamber at the end of the passage is bright with lamplight, bright enough to gleam on metal, bright enough to make the eyes ache after the dim quiet of your cell. Men stand there in robes of different colors. The hierarchy, a pattern you recognize even if you do not know the rules of it yet. They speak in low voices that ripple and overlap, a stream of phrases that mean everything and nothing. The sign was favorable. The lamb's liver was smooth. The star's course is unbroken. Your name passes between them like a bowl. For a span of heartbeats, you are sure they will hand you back to the corridor and tell you to go home. And then a thin man with nimble hands lifts a veil from a tray, and the tray carries instruments. Your breath goes small and quick without your permission. One of the robed men meets your gaze and holds it long enough to anchor you. "We are the guardians of the city's body," he says, "and you are our medicine." It is a phrase you will hear again in other rooms, in other seasons, from other mouths. It is the elegance with which they write over the violence that makes them so effective. The act they will perform has been described to you already in the roundabout way that priests prefer, a description that avoids blood and bone and skin while promising everything else that matters. Your future safety from distraction, your permanent enrollment among those who cannot wander out of their vows, your transformation into a vessel whose abstinence is guaranteed not by discipline but by design. They speak of the necessity as if it were gravity. They use words like consecration and preservation, and the words drop like stones into your thoughts until they sink out of sight. You lie down because you have been instructed to, and because a man who has spent his life obeying the city's rules does not begin his rebellion in the brightest room in the brightest temple at the center of the empire. The cords that hold your arms are not tight. They are simply there, reminders that choice has already been used up like kindling. They make the skin clean with vinegar. They talk to each other without raising their voices. The instruments are not many. Bronze holds a steadier edge than you expected. They have practiced this motion until their hands remember what to do without their mind's help. They will not turn away. They will not flinch. They do not tear. They sever. And they move quickly, because quickness is mercy of a sort, and also because it limits the space in which second thoughts can grow. Your throat opens, and a sound comes out of it that does not sound like any word you know. Afterward, the room becomes a geometry, angles of light, angles of elbows, the angle your mind takes to avoid the center of what has been done. They bind you and give you an infusion that tastes like the memory of a bitter herb. A priest, whose job it is to keep you tethered to the world, tells you a story about a city that survived a famine because those who sang in the temple sang with voices that could not be turned by lust. He smiles as if he has given you a gift. It is his truest smile. It is also a small thing held up to block a great thing. The infirmary is not cruel by design. The infirmary is efficient. This is important to understand because it reveals how the institution behind it thinks. Efficiency is the temple's synonym for compassion. They bring water on a schedule. They change bandages at intervals determined by a man who memorized a sequence of numbers before he had a beard. They keep the room at a temperature that denies fever, a foothold. Voices are gentle. Hands are practiced. Nothing is wasted. Not even pain, which they harvest for the story they tell you about your transformation, about how suffering burnishes the vessel and hollows out the places where the god's voice will echo best. Nights pass in a rotation of lamplight and drifting half-sleep, and in each waking you recalibrate your map of yourself. This, then, is the country you now are, but those breaths do not last. They are counted, as all things are counted in Babylon, and each moment of solitude is already scheduled to end before it begins. The priests know the length of every man's step, the rhythm of his breath, the tilt of his head when he walks past the altar. They know when to leave you alone long enough to let your guard loosen, and when to return so you remember whose walls these are. In their quiet arithmetic, Even silence is a tool, a space carved not for mercy, but for control. For the sealed men, the morning begins long before the sun stains the eastern gates. They are woken not by voices, but by the thin, insistent chime of a metal disc struck 3 times in the outer corridor. It is not loud, yet it cuts through the dream like a blade through cloth. The sound is shaped to wake without startling, to give no surge of strength, no flare of defiance, only the dull recognition that the day has started, and it will be like all other days. They rise from mats laid directly on stone. The rooms are narrow, unadorned except for the single niche that holds a clay lamp and a shallow bowl for washing. The water is cold, drawn from the temple's inner cisterns where sunlight never touches the surface. No one speaks in the first hour. Speech is reserved for the priest's questions, and they have not yet arrived. The corridor smells faintly of crushed reeds and old smoke. The floor is cool beneath bare feet, polished by decades of passage. Each man walks at the same measured pace, not because it is ordered, but because it is inevitable. To walk faster is to reach the courtyard sooner, and to reach the courtyard sooner is to wait longer for the rites to begin. In Babylon, waiting is a blade turned inward. You feel it more the longer you stand still. The first ritual of the day is not spoken of as a ritual at all. It is simply the measure. The sealed men stand in a line, backs to the courtyard wall, eyes forward. A priest walks the length of the line, carrying a staff carved with marks like the rings of a tree. He stops before each man, measuring height, shoulders, posture, the set of the jaw. He notes changes: weight lost, muscle slackened, a scar where none was before. He writes nothing down, yet nothing is forgotten. These details will be compared against memory during the next inspection, and the next, and the next, until the man's body tells a story the priests find worth correcting. After the measure, there is the binding, not with rope, but with expectation. The sealed men are led to the inner court, where the air is heavy with the scent of cedar and the low hum of a chant that seems to come from the very stones. They are given tasks: sweeping, carrying water, grinding grain. The work is slow and deliberate, designed not to finish quickly, but to fill the hours between the rites. The body is kept busy so the mind cannot wander too far. It is during this work that the true cruelty shows itself. The priests speak in low tones among themselves, but when they address a sealed man, their voices take on a peculiar gentleness, the kind one might use with a frightened animal. They ask if he has eaten, if he slept well, if the stone under his mat felt harder than usual. The questions are small, almost kind, but each one is a probe, searching for weakness, for the smallest crack in the wall of the man's will. When the rites begin, the sealed men are separated. No two witness the same act, though the structure is always similar. A priest will lead the man into a chamber lit only by oil lamps set in niches along the wall. The air is warm, scented with something sharp and sweet that makes thought feel heavy. The man is told to stand still, to breathe evenly, to let the spirit of the god move through him. The words are soft, but the eyes that watch are unblinking. What happens in these chambers is not recorded in the ledgers. In the ledgers, it is written simply as offering received or purity confirmed. But the man knows what was taken. He knows it in the way his legs feel weaker when he leaves, in the way the priests avoid touching him afterward, as if the act has left a residue that must fade before he is again fit for common use. Between the rites, the sealed men are allowed in the garden. This is not a kindness, it is a stage. The garden is enclosed on all sides by high walls, its paths arranged so that every corner can be watched from the upper balconies. The men walk among the palms and cypresses, their hands brushing the rough bark, their eyes sometimes meeting but never lingering. Here, in the soft rustle of leaves and the trickle of water from the fountain, they speak without words. A glance, a tightening of the jaw, a quick turn away, these are their language now. And yet, even here, the priest's presence is felt. One stands always at the far gate, his hands folded in his sleeves, his face expressionless. Another moves along the wall, pretending to inspect the vines. The men know better than to gather too closely, to stand in groups of 3 or more. Babylon's gods may be many, but the priest's god is order, and they will not have it disturbed. As the day wears on, the weight of the morning settles deeper. Tasks are repeated, not for necessity but for endurance. The grinding of grain, the carrying of water, the the sweeping of the same stone floors until the pattern of their cracks is memorized. The monotony is not an accident. It is the slow wearing down of the self until only the shape the priest's desire remains. When night falls, the sealed men are returned to their rooms. The lamps are lit just long enough for them to wash, then extinguished so darkness fills every corner. It is in this darkness that the mind is most dangerous when it can drift to what was before, to the streets beyond the temple walls, to the faces of those not seen since the sealing. The priests know this too, which is why the night is never entirely silent. Somewhere, always, there is the sound of sandals on stone, of a staff tapping in measured rhythm, of a door opening and closing. A reminder that even in darkness, they are never alone. And so the circle begins again. The breath that was your own for a little while is taken back, measured, and counted among the countless things the priests claim as theirs. The garden will be quiet again tomorrow, the lamps low, the walls unchanging. But in the space between heartbeats, in the brief pause before the chime strikes 3 times, there is still the possibility, faint, fragile, but real, of naming what is done to you, even if only in the silence of your own mind. And in Babylon, that is the beginning of defiance. The frost that clung to the edges of the canvas tent glistened faintly under the pale light of dawn. The world outside was still wrapped in the brittle silence of deep winter, broken only by the occasional groan of shifting ice in the distance. Inside, the faint orange glow from a dying fire painted the walls with restless shadows, and the air carried the faint, metallic tang of melted snow. Adrian stirred first. Sleep had been shallow, fractured by the haunting echo of last night's events. The encounter by the ridge, those unnatural tracks, the eerie quiet that had followed still played on his mind like an unfinished sentence. He sat up, his breath steaming in the frigid air, and let his gaze sweep the dim interior. Across from him, Alara remained curled in her blanket, her hair spilling over her face in an unruly curtain. She was breathing steadily, though her fingers twitched slightly in her sleep, as if chasing something in a dream. Outside, the first hues of morning began to bleed into the sky, a pale, reluctant light that revealed the shape of the frozen wilderness. Beyond the slope, a fog hung low, almost like a living thing, slowly curling its way toward camp. Adrian's instinct prickled. The fog wasn't natural, at least not in the way he knew fog to be. It seemed to move with intention, as though it were seeking, searching. He reached for his coat and boots, moving carefully so as not to wake Alara, and slipped outside into the biting air. The silence hit him first. There was no wind, no distant rumble of snow shifting, only the muffled sound of his own heartbeat. His boots crunched in the thin crust of ice as he took a few cautious steps toward the edge of camp. That's when he noticed it. The fog was warmer than the air. A faint tendril brushed against his glove, curling upward like smoke. He pulled back sharply. "Adrian?" The voice was soft, but edged with concern. Alara stood in the tent's opening, wrapped in her blanket, her eyes narrowing at the sight before her. She stepped out, barefoot on the frost, as though drawn toward the creeping haze. He held up a hand to stop her. "Don't get too close." Her gaze flicked to him, then back to the fog. "It's not natural." "I know." They watched in tense silence as the fog's advance slowed, then stopped entirely as if it had reached some invisible boundary around the camp. It lingered there, writhing almost imperceptibly, before retreating the way it had come, dissolving back into the tree line. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. When Adrian finally broke the silence, his voice was low, thoughtful. "It knows we're here." Alara's reply was equally quiet, but far less steady. "Then we can't stay." They moved quickly after that, packing their gear with the efficiency of seasoned travelers. By the time the sun had fully breached the horizon, their camp was nothing more than a faint impression in the snow. The landscape ahead was as unforgiving as ever, rolling stretches of white broken only by jagged cliffs and skeletal trees, but the weight of urgency pushed them forward,